I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home for the first time in 3 years. The gravel crunched under my tires the same way it always had, but everything else felt different. Wrong, somehow. Mom's roses were overgrown now, thorny and wild without her there to trim them back every Saturday morning. The house looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe that was just me getting older. Sarah sat in the passenger seat picking at her fingernails the way she does when she's nervous. She's 8 now, old enough to sense the tension but too young to understand why we hardly ever visited Grandma. I'd tried to explain it on the drive over, but how do you tell a kid that sometimes families just don't get along? That sometimes your own mother looks at you like you're a mistake she can't quite figure out how to fix? "Do I have to go in?" Sarah asked, her voice small. "Just for a little while, honey. Then we can go get ice cream, okay?" The front door was already open when we walked up the porch steps. Uncle Mike stood there with that same smirk he'd worn at Mom's funeral, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. He'd always been Mom's favorite brother, the one who could do no wrong. Growing up, I'd watch him whisper things in her ear that would make her look at me with fresh disappointment. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said, not bothering to move out of our way. "Didn't think you'd actually show up." I kept my mouth shut and squeezed Sarah's hand. The living room was packed with relatives I hadn't seen since the funeral. Aunt Linda sat on the couch, her face pinched like she'd been sucking on lemons. My cousins Mark and Jennifer huddled near the window, whispering and shooting glances my way. Even Mrs. Patterson, our old housekeeper, was there. She used to sneak me cookies when Mom wasn't looking, but now she wouldn't meet my eyes. The only person I was genuinely glad to see was my brother Tom, though that feeling died pretty quick when I saw his expression. He was sitting in Dad's old chair, his arms crossed, wearing the same look Mom used to get when she was gearing up for a fight. "I can't believe you brought her here," Tom said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He was talking about Sarah, and my stomach dropped. Mom specifically said, "Tom, don't." I sat down in the only empty chair, pulling Sarah onto my lap. She was trying to make herself as small as possible, and I hated that she had to see this. Hated that this was her introduction to half her family. Mr. Whitaker, Mom's lawyer, was setting up his briefcase at the dining room table that had been dragged into the living room for the occasion. He was a thin man with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of guy who probably ironed his underwear. He'd been handling Mom's affairs for 20 years, so he'd seen enough of our family drama to write a book. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Whitaker said, adjusting his glasses, "if we could all take our seats, we'll begin with the reading of Mrs. Eleanor Henderson's last will and testament." The room settled into an uncomfortable quiet. I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the same clock that used to drive me crazy when I was a kid doing homework. Sarah shifted on my lap, and I smoothed down her hair, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. Uncle Mike leaned against the fireplace, still wearing that smirk. "This should be interesting," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. A few people chuckled, and I felt my cheeks burn. I'd forgotten how they could make me feel like I was 12 years old again, standing in this same room while Mom listed all the ways I'd disappointed her that week. Tom was staring at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "She shouldn't even be here," he said to the room in general. Mom made it pretty clear how she felt. I wanted to leave. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to grab Sarah and walk out that door, to get in my car and drive back to our quiet little apartment, where nobody looked at us like we were intruders. But I stayed, not because I expected anything from Mom's will, but because I needed to see this through. For Sarah, maybe. Or maybe just for me. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat and opened the manila folder in front of him. The papers inside were thick, official-looking, with Mom's signature scrawled across the bottom in her familiar handwriting. For a second, seeing it there made my chest tight. She'd been gone 6 months now, but that signature looked like she'd just written it yesterday. "I, Eleanor Marie Henderson, being of sound mind and body," Mr. Whitaker began, his voice carrying that formal tone lawyers use when they're reading legal documents. The room was so quiet you could hear Uncle Mike's breathing from across the room. He went through all the standard stuff first. The house would go to Tom, which nobody was surprised about. Tom had always been the golden child, the one who called every Sunday and remembered to send flowers on Mother's Day. The antique furniture would be split between Aunt Linda and my cousins. Mom's jewelry collection would go to Jennifer, who'd been coveting those pearls since we were teenagers. I tried to keep my face neutral as each item was read off. Each name called, that wasn't mine. Sarah was being so good, sitting still on my lap even though I could tell she was getting restless. She kept looking around the room at all these people she barely knew, probably wondering why everyone seemed so tense. The painting collection, Mr. Whitaker continued, including the original Jameson landscape, will be left to Michael Henderson. Uncle Mike's smirk got wider. That painting was worth more than my car, and he knew it. Tom was practically glowing now, sitting back in Dad's chair like he owned the place, which I guess he basically did now. He caught my eye and gave me this look, like he was waiting for me to break down or start crying or something. But I'd learned a long time ago not to give him that satisfaction. The bank accounts were split between Tom and Uncle Mike. The rental properties Mom owned downtown would go to Tom as well. Even the old china set, the one that had been in the family for 3 generations, was going to Aunt Linda. I remembered helping Mom wash those dishes every Christmas, being so careful not to chip them because they were precious family heirlooms. Apparently, I wasn't precious enough to inherit them. And finally, Mr. Whitaker said, flipping to the last page, a trust fund of $50,000 will be established for the education of Jennifer's children, to be administered by Thomas Henderson. That was it. My name hadn't been mentioned once. Not even a small token. Not even a piece of jewelry or a photograph. It was like I'd never existed at all. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then Uncle Mike let out a low whistle. "Well, that's that," he said, sounding almost cheerful. Guess Eleanor knew what she was doing after all. Tom was trying not to smile, but I could see it tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I think we should probably," he started to say. But then Sarah spoke up. Her voice was small but clear, cutting through the thick air like a knife. "Excuse me," she said, looking directly at Mr. Whitaker. "But didn't you forget something?" Everyone turned to stare at her. My heart started racing, and I put my hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, honey, we should probably—" "No, Mom." She shook her head, her dark hair swinging. "Grandpa told me to make sure." She looked at Mr. Whitaker again. "There's supposed to be a video. He said it was really important." The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 10 degrees. Mr. Whitaker blinked, looking confused. "I'm sorry, sweetheart, but I don't know what you mean." Sarah pointed to a small envelope sitting on the table next to his briefcase. "It's in there. The little computer thing. Grandpa said to tell you if everyone forgot." My hands were shaking now. Dad had been gone for over a year, and I'd barely spoken to him in the months before he died. Mom had made sure of that, screening his calls and limiting his visits. But somehow he'd talked to Sarah. Somehow he'd made sure she knew. Mr. Whitaker picked up the envelope Sarah had pointed to, turning it over in his hands like it might bite him. I'd seen him set it aside earlier, but I'd assumed it was just more paperwork. Now everyone was staring at it like it was a bomb. "This envelope was sealed when your mother gave it to me," he said slowly. "She said it was from your father, but that I should only open it if—" He paused, looking around the room. "If someone specifically asked about it." Uncle Mike stepped forward, his face flushed. "Now hold on just a minute. Eleanor never said anything about any video. This is probably just some old home movie or something." But Mr. Whitaker was already opening the envelope. Inside was a small USB drive, the kind you can buy at any electronics store. Dad's handwriting was on the label, shaky but readable. "For my family, the whole truth. Robert Henderson." Tom was on his feet now, looking panicked. "This is ridiculous." Dad was sick at the end. He wasn't thinking clearly. "He was thinking fine when he talked to me," Sarah said quietly. She was still sitting on my lap, but she'd straightened up, looking more confident than I'd seen her all day. "He said Grandma was being mean to Mom, and that wasn't fair. He said he was going to fix it." The room erupted. Aunt Linda started talking about legal challenges and how this was all very suspicious. Uncle Mike was pacing back and forth, muttering about that little girl and how children shouldn't be involved in adult business. Tom was trying to convince Mr. Whitaker not to play whatever was on that drive. But Mr. Whitaker wasn't listening to any of them. He was already setting up his laptop, connecting cables and adjusting the screen so everyone could see. His face was completely neutral, but I could tell he was curious. 20 years of handling Mom's affairs had probably taught him that our family always had more secrets than we let on. I'm legally obligated to review any documents left by a deceased family member, he said calmly, even though Tom was still protesting, especially when they're specifically mentioned by a witness. The laptop screen flickered to life, and suddenly Dad was there. He was sitting in his old study, the one Mom had cleaned out and turned into a sewing room after he died. He looked tired, older than I remembered, but his eyes were clear and focused. He was wearing his favorite flannel shirt, the blue one with the frayed collar that Mom was always trying to throw away. "If you're watching this," Dad said, his voice coming through the laptop speakers, "then Eleanor is gone, and you're all gathered for the reading of her will. And if my granddaughter is there, then she did what I asked her to do." Sarah squeezed my hand and I realized I was crying. Not the dramatic, sobbing kind of crying that Tom probably expected, but quiet tears that I couldn't seem to stop. I hadn't heard Dad's voice in over a year, and hearing it now felt like a punch to the gut. "I need to tell you all something," Dad continued. "Something I should have said a long time ago, but I was too much of a coward." He looked directly into the camera, and for a moment it felt like he was looking right at me. "Eleanor wasn't fair to our daughter. She wasn't fair to either of our children, but she was especially cruel to the one who needed her most." The silence in the room was deafening. Uncle Mike had stopped pacing. Tom had sunk back into his chair, his face pale. Even Mrs. Patterson was staring at the screen with her mouth slightly open. "I stood by and let it happen," Dad said, his voice getting stronger. "I let my wife turn half this family against my own daughter. I let her poison your minds with lies and half-truths. I let her make that little girl feel like she wasn't good enough, like she didn't belong." He paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "And I will regret that for whatever time I have left." Dad leaned forward in his chair on the screen, and I could see the weight he'd been carrying in the slope of his shoulders. Behind him, his bookshelves were exactly as I remembered them, filled with the mystery novels and history books he loved to read on Sunday afternoons. It felt strange seeing that room again, knowing Mom had erased every trace of it after he died. "I should have protected her," Dad continued, his voice steady but heavy with regret. "When Eleanor started turning you all against her, I should have stood up. When she made excuses for why my daughter couldn't come to family dinners or why she wasn't invited to Christmas morning, I should have put a stop to it." Tom was shaking his head, but he wasn't interrupting anymore. Uncle Mike had gone completely still, his face unreadable. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I kept staring at the screen at my father's face. Sarah was holding my hand so tight I could feel her little fingernails digging into my palm. "The truth is," Dad said, looking directly into the camera again, "your mother was jealous. Our daughter was everything Eleanor wanted to be but couldn't. She was kind without having to work at it. She was smart in ways that threatened your mother. And when she got pregnant young and had to make some hard choices, Eleanor saw it as proof that she was right about her all along." My breath caught in my throat. He knew. Somehow Dad had known about the way Mom treated my pregnancy with Sarah, how she'd made me feel like a failure and a disappointment, how she'd used my mistakes to justify years of coldness that had started long before Sarah was even born. "But I watched that little girl grow up to be a wonderful mother," Dad continued, and his voice got softer. "I watched her raise my granddaughter with more love and patience than Eleanor ever showed our own children. And I realized that the problem was never with her. The problem was with us." Uncle Mike finally found his voice. "This is garbage." Bob was losing it at the end. "Everyone knows that." But Mr. Whitaker held up a hand for silence. Dad was still talking, and his words were getting more pointed. "Mike, you enabled every cruel thing Eleanor ever did. You laughed when she made jokes about our daughter's weight when she was 12. You stood by when she uninvited her from Thanksgiving because she couldn't afford to bring an expensive enough side dish. You helped turn our family gatherings into exercises in humiliation." Uncle Mike's face went red, but he didn't say anything. I remembered that Thanksgiving. I'd been working 2 jobs and could barely afford groceries, let alone Mom's expectations for what everyone should contribute to dinner. I'd called to ask if I could just bring rolls from the store, and Mom had told me not to bother coming at all. "And Tom," Dad said, turning his attention to my brother, "you were so desperate for your mother's approval that you threw your own sister under the bus every chance you got. You told Eleanor lies about phone calls that never happened and visits that were never offered. You made yourself look better by making her look worse. Tom's mouth fell open. That's not... I never... But Dad wasn't finished. I heard you, son. I heard you telling your mother that your sister was bitter and jealous, and that's why she didn't come around. But the truth is, she stopped coming around because every time she did, someone in this room made her feel unwelcome. The room was so quiet you could hear the old house settling around us. Mrs. Patterson was crying softly in the corner. Aunt Linda was staring at her hands like she was seeing them for the first time. Even the cousins looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. So I'm fixing it, Dad said, sitting back in his chair. What I'm about to tell you is legally binding. I've had lawyers review everything and it's all been properly filed and notarized. He picked up a piece of paper from his desk. This is a codicil to Eleanor's will. It overrides her decisions regarding my portion of our shared assets. Mr. Whitaker was frantically shuffling through his papers, pulling out documents I hadn't seen before. His face had gone pale. Everything that belonged to me, Dad said clearly. The land I inherited from my father, the investments I made before I married Eleanor, the life insurance policy that has my name on it. All of it goes to my daughter and my granddaughter. Eleanor could control what was hers, but she couldn't control what was mine. The explosion of voices was immediate. Tom was shouting about legal challenges and unfair distribution. Uncle Mike was yelling about manipulation and undue influence. But I couldn't hear any of it clearly because there was a rushing sound in my ears like I was underwater. Dad wasn't done talking. And if anyone in this room tries to contest this decision or make life difficult for my daughter and granddaughter, they'll find themselves cut out of everything else too. I've made provisions. He looked tired then, older than his 68 years. I should have done this a long time ago. I should have been the father she deserved instead of the coward I was. Maybe this doesn't make up for it, but it's a start. The video ended with Dad saying he loved me and that he was proud of the woman I'd become. Then the screen went black, and the only sound was the laptop's fan humming quietly. Nobody moved for what felt like forever. It was like someone had pressed pause on the whole room. Then, Tom exploded. This is complete bullshit. He jumped up from Dad's chair so fast it rocked backward. Dad was on medication at the end. Half the time he didn't even remember what day it was. There's no way this can be legally binding. But Mr. Whitaker was already spreading out documents across the dining room table, his movements quick and efficient. Actually, Mr. Henderson, your father filed this codicil 14 months ago, well before his health declined significantly. I have the medical evaluations that were required, and he was declared competent by 2 different physicians. Uncle Mike was pacing again, his hands clenched into fists. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I'd expect. She probably talked him into this when Eleanor wasn't around to protect him. I barely saw Dad in his last year, I said quietly, and my voice sounded strange in my own ears. Mom made sure of that, remember? She said visits upset him too much. Convenient story now, Tom snapped, but some of the fight had gone out of him. He was staring at the papers Mr. Whitaker was organizing, and I could see the reality starting to sink in. Sarah slipped off my lap and walked over to the table where Mr. Whitaker was working. She was so small next to all the legal documents, but she looked at them with the same intense curiosity she usually reserved for her homework. What does it mean? She asked Mr. Whitaker. The stuff Grandpa said? He looked down at her with something that might have been kindness. It means your grandfather left you and your mother some very important things. Land and money and other assets that will help take care of you. More than what everyone else got? Mr. Whitaker glanced around the room, then back at Sarah. Yes, sweetheart. Quite a bit more. That's when Aunt Linda found her voice. This is ridiculous. Eleanor would be rolling over in her grave. That girl has done nothing but cause problems for this family. What problems? The words came out of my mouth before I could stop them. I stood up, feeling shaky, but suddenly angry. What problems have I caused exactly? Not coming to events I wasn't invited to? Not calling people who hung up on me? Not pretending everything was fine when everyone in this room treated me like garbage? Aunt Linda's face flushed. You always had an attitude. Always acting like you were too good for us. I had an attitude? I laughed, but it didn't sound funny. I spent 20 years trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. 20 years wondering why my own family couldn't stand the sight of me. And now I find out it was nothing It was just Mom being jealous and all of you going along with it because it was easier than standing up to her. Jennifer spoke up from her corner by the window. It wasn't like that. Mom said you never wanted to be part of the family. She said you thought you were better than us because you went to college. I went to community college, I said, incredulous. I got a 2-year degree while working full-time and raising a baby. And somehow that made me think I was better than everyone? The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Less hostile, more ashamed, maybe. Mrs. Patterson was openly crying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. She'd been there for most of my childhood, had seen how Mom treated me, and I think she was finally understanding what she'd witnessed. Tom slumped back into Dad's chair, all the anger drained out of him. I didn't know, he said quietly. I mean, I knew Mom was hard on you, but I thought you brought it on yourself somehow. By existing? I asked, and my voice cracked a little. By being born? Because I never figured out what I was supposed to do differently. Uncle Mike was still pacing, but slower now, like he was running out of steam. Your father was always too soft on you, he muttered, but it sounded half-hearted. No, I said, looking right at him. Dad was the only one who saw me as a person instead of a problem to be solved. And apparently, he was the only one who cared enough to do something about it. Mr. Whitaker cleared his throat. If I may, he said, there are quite a few details we need to discuss regarding the transfer of assets. Mrs. He paused, realizing he'd never gotten my married name. Morrison, I said, but I kept my maiden name for Sarah, so she's Sarah Henderson. Mrs. Morrison, your father's bequest includes the 40-acre plot on Maple Road, the rental duplex on Cherry Street, and a substantial investment portfolio. Combined, we're looking at approximately $400,000 in assets. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Tom made a choking sound. Uncle Mike stopped pacing entirely. Even I felt dizzy hearing it said out loud. I don't remember much about the next hour. Mr. Whitaker walked me through paperwork that would need to be filed, gave me business cards for financial advisors, and explained tax implications that went right over my head. Sarah sat beside me the whole time, coloring in a notebook she'd brought, occasionally looking up when someone's voice got too loud. Tom didn't say much after learning about the money. He just sat in Dad's chair, staring at the coffee table like it held answers to questions he didn't know how to ask. A few times he started to say something, but then he'd look at me and stop. I think he was finally understanding what Dad's video had really been about. It wasn't just about money. It was about 20 years of making me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. Uncle Mike left without saying goodbye, muttering something about lawyers and unfair advantages. Aunt Linda and the cousins followed soon after, offering awkward hugs that felt more like obligations than genuine affection. Mrs. Patterson was the last to go, and she stopped in front of me with tears in her eyes. I should have said something, she whispered. All those years I should have stood up for you. I hugged her, this woman who had been more of a mother to me than my own in many ways. It wasn't your job to fix our family, Mrs. Patterson. She pulled back and looked at Sarah, who was packing up her coloring supplies. You're a good mother, she said. Your little girl is lucky to have you. After everyone left, it was just me, Sarah, and Tom in the big empty house. Mr. Whitaker had gone back to his office with promises to call me next week about the paperwork. The silence felt different now, less hostile but somehow heavier. Tom was still sitting in Dad's chair, and he looked older than his 35 years. I fucked up, he said quietly, not looking at me. I fucked up so bad, and I don't know how to fix it. Sarah looked up from her backpack. You said a bad word. Despite everything, I almost smiled. Yes, he did. Uncle Tom shouldn't use that language. Sorry, kiddo, Tom said, and he sounded like he meant it. He looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. I'm sorry for everything. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I didn't know what to say to that. Part of me wanted to tell him it was okay, that we could start over, that family was family, and we should stick together. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt for so long, wasn't ready to forgive just because he'd finally seen the truth. I don't know what happens now, I said honestly. I don't know if we can fix this. Tom nodded. like he'd expected that answer. Would it be okay if I called you sometime? Not about the money or the house or any of that stuff. Just to, I don't know, to try. I looked at Sarah, who was watching both of us with her serious 8-year-old eyes. Maybe, I said. We'll see. We left the house together, but Tom went to his car and we went to ours. As I buckled Sarah into her booster seat, she asked the question I'd been dreading. Are we rich now, Mom? I got into the driver's seat and sat there for a moment, looking at the house where I'd grown up. We're going to be okay, I said finally. We don't have to worry about money for a while. Good, she said, matter-of-factly. Can we still get ice cream? I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had all day. Yeah, baby, we can definitely get ice cream. As we drove away, I caught Sarah looking back at the house through the rear window. Grandpa was nice, she said. I'm sad I didn't get to know him better. Me too, I said, and I meant it. Dad had finally stood up for me, but he'd done it from beyond the grave. I would have given anything to have had that conversation with him while he was alive, to have heard him say those words to my face instead of to a camera. That night, after Sarah was asleep, I sat on our small apartment balcony and thought about the future. The money Dad left us would change everything. We could move out of this cramped place, maybe buy a house with a yard where Sarah could play. I could go back to school, maybe finish the degree I'd started before she was born. We could take vacations, buy nice clothes, eat dinner at restaurants where you don't order at a counter. But more than the money, Dad had given me something I'd been searching for my whole life. Proof that I wasn't the problem. Validation that the way I'd been treated wasn't normal or deserved. Permission to stop trying to earn love from people who had decided long ago that I wasn't worth it. I pulled out my phone and looked at Tom's contact information. He'd texted me earlier with his new number and a simple message. Thank you for bringing Sarah today. Dad was right about everything. I didn't text him back, but I didn't delete the message either. Maybe someday we'd figure out how to be siblings again. Maybe we wouldn't. Either way, I was finally free to make that choice on my own terms. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was enough. Just as I was, just as I'd always been. And that feeling was worth more than any inheritance could ever be.